Good morning to each and every one of you. I want to welcome you all to this press conference here this morning in Skid Row. We have a couple other folks that are on their way as well, a few other elected officials. I guess the economy is opening up right now because they're stuck on traffic on the 5 freeway coming in from the valley. Nonetheless, I want to thank you very much for joining us here today. I want to begin by thanking the Skid Row Trust for hosting us today, and I want to thank the speakers that you'll hear from who are participating in today's press conference, especially those who have been dedicated to the issue of homelessness. Now, I want you to think about this for a moment, because right now, you're standing at ground zero of the nation's homelessness crisis. Skid Row. Not ground zero for Los Angeles, not ground zero for California, but ground zero for the entire United States of America. In fact, there are more unhoused Angelenos in my council district number 14, than there are in the entire city of Chicago, the third most populated city in America. To be clear, Skid Row didn't just accidentally materialize. Skid Row was created for marginalized people living in Los Angeles. It was designed intentionally to contain, and some would say segregate, the city's unhoused community. What we learn is that neither homelessness nor the factors that cause it can be contained or segregated. There are over 150,000 people experiencing homelessness in our great state, the Golden State of California. The factors that brought people to Skid Row are not fundamental to this specific neighborhood. Institutional racism is not a Skid Row problem. Mental illnesses is not a Skid Row problem. Domestic violence, alcoholism, drug addiction, foster care, poverty, just plain bad luck. These are not Skid Row problems. Skid Row is the byproduct of these tragic human conditions combined with the lack of affordable housing. We are all witnesses and experiencing a growing dystopian nightmare in cities all across California. The same tragic factors that I just listed are everywhere. They're as pernicious today as they were when the Skid Row was institutionalized as the city's Band-Aid solution for homelessness. A Band-Aid can't stop bleeding the major wound of a major laceration. We need to do the damage that's been done, to give tens of thousands of human beings, our friends, our neighbors, our loved ones, our own family members, a modicum of decency and respect, the decency and respect that they deserve as human beings, as Angelenos, as Californians, as Americans. It doesn't take a sociology professor or clinical social worker to figure out what's wrong. Let's just be clear with each and every one of us here today. Homelessness, by definition, is the condition of not having a home. So the most immediate solution is to create housing that puts a roof over our people's heads. Am I right? Yes. Because COVID decimated our economy. Cities don't have the resources to invest to house our homelessness in a very meaningful way. Now, I sit on the city's Budget and Finance Committee, and I can tell you this, I've seen the numbers. California needs to take bold action and create a California recovery plan, a plan that gives cities the resources and flexibility. They need to build housing quickly. We need to move people from our streets, from our sidewalks, from our alleyways, from their cars, from our parks, from our RVs, into clean, safe housing units. Roughly 4 unhoused Angelenos die each night on our streets. Just last year alone, over 1,383 Angelenos lost their lives on our city streets in LA County. This, I would agree, we would all agree, is unconscionable. Am I right? Yes. Now, we're talking about one of the wealthiest cities with some of the most wealthiest people on planet Earth. We must act with a sense of urgency to meet this humanitarian crisis with, let me underscore, with unprecedented investment. This is why, as a former Senate President Pro Tem of your California State Senate, I have asked past leaders of our California State Senate and our California State Assembly to join me in signing a letter calling on my colleagues in the California State Legislature and the governor to commit over $20 billion over the next 5 years to help for homeless housing development throughout California, but especially in Los Angeles, and especially right here in Skid Row. Now, by investing $20 billion, that's not 20 million, nor is that 200 million. $20 billion over the next 5 years, the state can help turn the tide on this humanitarian crisis. We're also going to urge our colleagues to provide the spending guidelines that require accountability, so we get the most bang for the buck. We provide the highest value for our constituents, for our taxpayers, but for those who are unhoused today. And allow for flexibility for cities to tailor housing solutions to their needs, and roofs and beds and spaces that can be created in weeks and months, not years, but weeks and months. Right now, we have a generation growing up believing that people living in tents and in our streets is in fact quite normal. The lack of leadership collectively at every level of government has normalized this. We can't afford to normalize homelessness. That's why we're together, across the spectrum. Homeless advocates, unhoused individuals, business organizations, elected officials, everyone from the left and the right and points in between, advocating and making sure our voices are heard to get that money now, not tomorrow. We have one shot at reversing course on this homelessness crisis or face continued years of struggle. Let's not miss this opportunity. Let's go for it. Let's seize the moment that's before us. Let's show Angelenos in California and the rest of the country who we are. Let's step up and do the right thing. Thank you very much. Yeah. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our Assembly member who represents Skid Row, our Assembly member who is fighting for us every single day. There's going to be a champion out there to make sure we get those dollars to Californians, to make sure we get those dollars to LA and Skid Row. Let's get up for Assemblymember Miguel Santiago. Miguel Santiago.
Here's why we're here today. We're here to fight for the dollars that are much needed. If you take a look around, close to 5,000 people in a few square blocks live on the streets. And here's why it's timely. During COVID, we heard a lot about communities getting left behind. But if you were homeless, not only did you get left behind, you got left out in the cold, in the heat. You got left out with no resources. No COVID testing. Vaccines are still a problem. There's not a roof over your head. No food to eat or even clean water. That shouldn't happen in the 5th largest economy in the world and one of the richest nations, where millionaires and billionaires are living not too far away from here. Some folks just don't have clean water to drink every day. So what we're saying is there should be a large investment. Let me take you back a little bit in history. In 2016, we sat out here in Skid Row with the first ever funding formula for homelessness. And that was a No Place Like Home, championed by us and led by the Senate Pro Tem at the time, Kevin de León. We fought for HEAP dollars, which was basically budget dust, about $250 million out of a $230 billion budget. We fought for HAP dollars. Last year, the investment was about $750 million. We carried the bills over and over, asking for a continuous funding formula of $2 billion. The problem has grown so big in California that it demands bold action. The Senate has put on the table $20 billion over the next 5 years. The Assembly has put on the table $20 billion over the next 5 years, but they've only begun the discussion. Why we're here today is because we don't want that to be lost. This is going to be the fight of our lifetime to ensuring that over the next 5 years, we make an adequate investment to finally tackle the problem of our lifetime, where small children are laying on the streets, where it's become okay by some. We have tent cities all over this city and all over the state of California. So the May revise is coming up. That's when the governor proposes a budget. We want to see the largest ever investment in homelessness, but we also want to see some accountability. So let's be very clear about what we're doing here today. We are asking for the largest, boldest investment in homelessness funding. We're asking for a radical change in the way we solve homelessness, ironclad accountability, and the sense of an emergency sense-like actions to solve it. Because the same old thing that we've been doing has not been working if you ask most people in the state of California. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. You got to put it all on the table. Years ago, we sat here in Skid Row and we did the CEQA exemptions, AB 1197. That was supposed to streamline and immediately build all emergency shelters of permanent supportive housing. And yet we only got about 500 left that have been built. So we want that radical change, that ironclad accountability, and also that emergency sense-like action that gives us that urgency to get this done. So this will be the fight of our lifetime to make sure that we draw down the dollars and put all common sense solutions to get folks who are living on the streets in a permanent housing. That's what the goal is after. Los medios de comunicación en español, esta va a ser la batalla de nuestro tiempo, donde la gente ahorita vive en las calles y queremos asegurar que tengan dignidad y que tengan una casa donde vivir. Ahorita, en la economía más grande del mundo, la quinta economía más grande, hay niños que viven en la calle. Hay niños y familias no muy lejos de aquí que no tienen un hogar, no tienen agua, comida y viven olvidados. Y queremos nosotros asegurar que el Estado, donde yo estoy, haga el invertimiento más grande que se ha visto en nuestra historia. Por los próximos 5 años, 20 billones de dólares. O sea, 20 billones de dólares en los próximos 5 años para atacar este problema de la gente que vive en la calle y darles dignidad y un hogar donde vivir, los servicios médicos que ocupan y a lo igual, comida para esos niños que viven en la calle. Cuando billonarios y millonarios viven unas cuantas cuadras de aquí, hay más de 5,000 gentes que viven en las calles. Y es por eso que ocupamos ese tipo de cambio urgente y ahora. Se lo regreso al concejal Kevin de León. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Brother Miguel Santiago. Next, we're going to have a man who is considered the sharp tip of the spear in Skid Row. He's walking around Skid Row all the time saying, yes, we can, because he represents LA Can. Let's bring up Pete White, Pedro Blanco, everybody. Pedro Blanco. Brother Pete White.
Pete White, the Los Angeles Community Action Network. Before I start this 2-minute remark, I just want to say thank you to Assemblymember Santiago. During the height of the pandemic, when everyone was sheltering in place and running away from our communities, cats like Miguel was in the community, passing out food, rubbing elbows, making sure that resources made it here. So I want y'all to give him a round of applause for that. He actually danced a little bit as well, got that on video. And then to my left, I want to once again welcome Councilmember de León. From day one, since he's touched down, he's never forgotten about Skid Row. I catch him creeping out in his sneakers. You know, he has his little seersucker suit on today, but I catch him in the neighborhood. Yo, I saw you, your chucks. But he's in the neighborhood, right? A very visible and a very present leadership, the type of leadership that we need to move forward if we're dreaming big. The Los Angeles story is the state of California's story. Los Angeles finds itself at a crossroads. On one hand, we've recently told bold truths about the extent to which structural racism has informed this crisis. Redlining, racial covenants, hard-nosed segregation, baton banishment, why black people are a defining feature of the homeless crisis. However, on the other hand, instead of repair, Los Angeles continues to install new devices that achieved the same deleterious goals: sweeps, enforcement zones, parking lot camps, tool sheds, etc. A response that ensures one thing: more houselessness. We are in search of leadership willing to take bold steps forward to ensure those who are houseless and marginally housed are housed, not afraid to take action now to slow the inevitable tsunami of pandemic evictions, willing to go the distance to marshal the resources needed to invest in new ideas and models and bring Californians inside permanently. Today represents a big move in that direction, leaving no rock unturned, no door unopened, never taking no for an answer or accepting a million excuses why we can't house Californians is the only way out of this crisis. We will need it all: state, local, federal resources to stem the tide of this crisis, opting for action, not closed sessions and Hobson's choices. Resource allocations must reflect the true needs of Californians and Los Angelinos. We must center housing first, a guaranteed wage, healthy food access, healthcare, and investment that demands better neighbors, same neighborhoods. We are in no way interested in the race backwards towards shelters and structures that keep people homeless. Securing $20 billion over 5 years can jumpstart a new social contract, can begin to rebuild lives in communities, can stop so many from ever having to endure homelessness, can begin to build a state that everyone can call home. Thank you.
I love that, Brother P. White. I love that. I love what you just said. Thank you very much. LA can. Next, as we had a council member all the way from San Fernando Valley. She fought the traffic. It shows that the economy is opening up right now, but she's here nonetheless. And she has been a leader, leader outright in the Valley. She also is a member of the Budget and Finance Committee, so she knows what the numbers are. And that's why she's adding her voice and stepping up to make sure we get that $20 billion for California, especially for LA. Let's get up for Councilmember Monica Rodriguez. Yeah. Councilmember Rodriguez.
Thank you so much, Councilmember de León. And Pete, I think you just nailed it. You said all the reasons why we are here today. Angelinos have assessed themselves to help create more housing options for members of our community, like here in Skid Row, which represents the epicenter of the systematic underinvestment in housing and resources that help uplift members of our community. Angelinos assess themselves in absence of the state and federal government, helping to invest those critical dollars that would deliver the very housing opportunities that families seek, not requiring them to pay more than 50% of their income towards housing solutions. The system has broken and failed families in Los Angeles. And we need our state and federal government to step up and do their part to deliver the resources so that post-pandemic we can help uplift families and make sure that we end the cycle of poverty and homelessness in Los Angeles. I am so proud to be joining community leaders, civic leaders, and elected officials to unify our voices to make sure that we conclude this cycle, that it happens now. The flexibility that has come and the silver lining that has come as a result of pandemic has resulted in additional resources being made available for us to provide those immediate housing solutions. Housing solutions that have offered the flexibility for us to help meet people where they are. I'm really proud that as a result of Project Room Key, we were able to house the largest encampment in the city by providing 100% housing solutions for those in the encampment in my district in Paxton and Bradley. 67 individuals, all moved and relocated to one location. More than half have already been provided and connected to permanent solutions. We need to get people into shelter now. We need our families in Los Angeles to no longer be exposed to some of the concerns and impacts that result as a result of not having access to adequate housing. This is the moment where we use our collective voices to demand those resources be allocated from our state. As Assemblymember Santiago mentioned, we are the 5th largest economy in the world. There is no excuse for us not to be dedicating these resources to meeting the needs of our families and the members of our communities that are living unhoused. And so collectively, we will continue to demand that the resources from Sacramento and from the federal government make their way to the streets of Los Angeles, because time's up. It is time that we deliver for our community, and the time is now. Thank you very much.
I love that, Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez. For our elected officials, for our friends and allies, both in Sacramento, Washington, D.C., the time is now, and we're watching that clock. Colleagues, friends, I want to be patient. We're going to have a few more speakers coming up, and then we can open up to Q&A, or we're going to have individual interviews with everyone who's here today. From the Skid Row Housing Trust, let's get it for Lee Ragas. Lee Ragas.
Yeah, welcome everyone. First of all, I want to, excuse me, I want to thank Councilmember de León for scheduling this, bringing awareness to this, advocating for the $20 billion that he mentioned, and really just bringing eyes to the community, because it really makes sure that it lands real and it lands in the home in which it's going to be able to serve. I also want to thank Assemblymember Santiago. You know, I want to echo what Pete from LA Can said. You know, when the pandemic broke out, we were very strapped for resources. So as people sheltered in home, essential businesses like all the ones that you see up here right now, we needed help obtaining food for our SRO residents. And Miguel Santiago obtained it and distributed with us in the streets for months, making sure that our residents, you know, got what they needed. So thank you for that. Very, 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 very much. So one of the things that we want to echo here, just as the organization, one of the organizations that they're supporting is making sure that we embrace and support and advocate with them the urgency for this funding. You know, I really liked it, and it's a lot of money, but I really do like the phrase, you know, budget dust that was just kind of, you know, put out there. And I do want to put it in perspective. If you have seen what we've been able to do with all these organizations back here with the budget dust, imagine what we can do with what they're trying to obtain for us. So I do want to, I want to make sure that that's very clear, and that I land that on them. You know, I want to just briefly explain like the how. So Skid Row Housing Trust has been around for about 30 years, and we were born through our foremother, on innovation and creation, because there wasn't a lot of funding at that time, and we wanted to make sure that we were leveraging what we had. So there were hotels, SRO hotels at the time, and there was a small homelessness population, and that board brought together that housing stock with that problem back in the 80s. So that innovation, that innovative spirit is just the same thing that we want to carry forward today. In the 90s, we implemented a property management company. In the 2000s, we partnered with the county to make sure that we identified the 50 most at-risk individuals on the street and help launch that through the COB. Actually, and I want to just kind of shout out to Pete too, a collaboration example is LA Can and Skid Row Housing Trust go way, way back with, I think it's the property Rossmore, right? So, and look what LA Can grew up into, look what the trust grew up into. So again, really support the funding, really push for the advocacy on that, because if you saw what Pete and Amy and everyone up here does, you'll see what can be done in like the next, you know, 1 to 2 years. I want to make sure that we facilitate and lift up the voices about what you're going to hear of the many different types of housing. There's transitional, there's shelters, there's campsites, there's permanent supportive housing. And again, thank you. Assemblyman Santiago, thank you, Councilmember de León, for making sure that this happened today, that this advocacy happened today, and very, very much looking forward to the future in solving this homelessness issue with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lee. Just a few more folks. I'm going to beg for your patience, please. A few more folks. Next up, we have the Executive Director of the Downtown Women's Center. That's no other than Amy Turk. Amy Turk.
Thank you, Council Member. As the CEO of the Downtown Women's Center, it is frankly really hard to sleep at night knowing that 20,300 women do not have a home across Los Angeles County. Though homelessness is awful for anyone, since 2013, women's homelessness has more than doubled, growing at a rate outpacing that of men. And what is further disturbing, everyone knows here, is how blatantly homelessness demonstrates the result of racism. In the Skid Row community, 60% of the women experiencing homelessness are African American. We also know from Downtown Women's Center's most recent 2019 LA City Women's Needs Assessment that more than half of the women experiencing homelessness have also experienced domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and sexual assault. Downtown Women's Center envisions a Los Angeles with every woman housed and on a path to personal stability. We are the only social service exclusively dedicated to ending women's homelessness, and we do this through providing housing, healthcare, and employment. And as a member with our colleagues up here of the Skid Row community for over 43 years, we know that when financial resources increase, the number of people who find housing increases. We saw this when Los Angeles came together with Measure H, and our sector was able to double the amount of people being housed. We saw this with Prop HHH, and for example, now Downtown Women's Center is expanding into 6 new buildings, doubling the amount of supportive housing for women, both in Skid Row and across the county. We saw this when our council district and our mayor's office supported Project 100 through HEAP dollars. That dust really helped us deepen our ability to house women in the Skid Row community. We're going to keep using that dust terminology here. And then FEMA came in and offered full reimbursement for Project Room Key, and that enabled Downtown Women's Center and so many others to shelter people safely through COVID. But what's been missing too long is the investment that we're here talking about today. And we're so thankful for the true leadership that surrounds us that will bring in this $20 billion in the next 5 years. Let's do it together, and thank you for your time.
Next, let me bring up a woman who needs no introduction. She heads up Poverty Matters. She is the conscience of the Democratic Party of the state of California by her actions this past weekend in defeating particular measures. One day they're going to erect a statue of her in Skid Row. Let's get it for Susie Shannon. Susie Shannon.
Thank you, everyone, for coming today. So I've worked on Skid Row since 2005, primarily at night. I have seen rats run over people. I have seen rats running in the gutter. I have seen rats running down trees into people's tents. I have seen women in wheelchairs with absolutely nothing, including no shoes. I have seen children rolling backpacks behind them. I have seen entire families living in cars with infants. I had a client with AIDS who died in his car waiting for housing. I fought to get a woman into shelter for an entire month, only to have her eaten by bed bugs at night and end up in the emergency room. I have brought elected officials, including Assemblymember Miguel Santiago and Councilmember Kevin de León, out to Skid Row at night during the pandemic, before the pandemic, and it will be after the pandemic, because they are the real deal and they care. And they will come out at night and they will hand out blankets and they will talk to people so that they don't default to the stereotypes that we see in media. So I really want to applaud them today for bringing forward this proposal for $20 billion for our homeless community. There are 151,000 people who are homeless in the state of California, and I have been up and down this state many times. Skid Row is not unique, other than the fact that it has a concentrated group of homelessness, but there's homelessness across the state, and we definitely need it. But we want to make sure that this money is used properly. There are too many who benefit from the current system with too few results. People who are unhoused right now A lot of them are trapped in a system where they are shuttled from shelter to shelter and in a revolving door back out into homelessness. If we keep doing the same thing, we will get the same results. As Assemblymember Miguel Santiago said, too many people are dehumanized and deprioritized. A recent poll showed that 96% of Angelenos see homelessness as the most serious issue facing this city. PPIC has run a poll consistently which shows that homelessness is the #1 issue. It is time for Sacramento to step up to the plate and to put the money where it needs to be, where the people want it to be, where it is needed, and now. Not later, but now. It's just time to get this done, and I want to thank everyone for doing this today, and for our council members for coming out, Assembly Member Miguel Santiago, and we need to push, we need to make sure that we're implementing housing first, that we are doing this in a way where we never have to spend $500,000, $700,000 a unit again, using prefab modular housing, doing motel conversions, whatever is needed to get it done. Thank you.
I'll interpret what Susie Shannon just said. She said, Miguel Santiago, don't come back home without that money. Yeah. Just stay in Sacramento. Don't show up. Yeah. Don't come back home. Next up, we have the Chief Advocate Officer for one of our leading business organizations who represents some of the largest conglomerates in the world as well as the nation. That's no other than DeAndre Valencia. DeAndre?
Good morning. My name is DeAndre Valencia, and I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer for BizFed, which is the Los Angeles County Business Federation. I'm here representing our 214 business organizations, which is comprised of over 450,000 employers that employ over 4 million Angelenos throughout our county. I'm here today alongside members Miguel Santiago, LA Councilmember de León, and my fellow partners to ask the governor and the legislature to take bold steps to address our homeless crisis and allocate the appropriate funding to make a change. In 2018, BizFed implemented its anti-poverty initiative and created its anti-poverty committee with the goal of lifting 1 million Angelenos out of poverty over the next decade. BizFed promises to work with our partners and elected officials to ensure that the funding is allocated will house our homeless and ensure we implement programs that have proven to work. But most importantly, BizFed's #1 priority is to bring about accountability and oversight, to ensure that every dollar spent is accounted for and that there are metrics in place to track our results. BizFed looks forward to this endeavor and is willing to do whatever it takes to house our homeless. Thank you.
We have two last speakers, two very powerful women. I want to bring up a woman who was formerly unhoused, a woman who is resilient, a woman who has struggled in her life like many of us have struggled in our lives, but a woman who is an example of perseverance and resiliency and, quite frankly, of dignity, a strong black woman, a woman who is symbolic of who we are in many ways as a city, as a state. So a woman, a flower that grows, in the middle of cement and asphalt and busts through all that concrete to become who she is today. Let's give it up for Suzette Shaw. Suzette Shaw.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Councilman de León. Thank you so much. Yes. My name is Suzette Shaw. I am a Skid Row resident. I write, talk, and I advocate Skid Row from a woman's perspective. Ending up in Skid Row changed my life lens. The day I ended up in Skid Row, December 6, 2012, from a women's safe house, I went from transitional housing, hotel, SRO, and I am permanently housed today now 4 years. As a poet, I oftentimes say Skid Row looks like the slave mothership was capsized here. That's how bad it looks as far as black folks. And that does make Skid Row unique. In Skid Row, I was faced with the truth of what it means to be a black woman in America, especially one enduring poverty. I learned quickly who America values and who it doesn't, who it humanizes and who it devalues. Just weeks, months, years prior, I was a single, struggling, middle-aged woman who lived in an upper middle-class neighborhood. I was working with a loan officer to buy a home at the time I lost my job, April 23rd, 2010. For 2 years, I made trying to find a sustainable employment my mission, yet I was not able to. July 2012, I was displaced, and I went living in my SUV in almost 120-degree weather in the desert of Yuma, Arizona, my hometown, before I came to Skid Row, before I came to Los Angeles. I was the executive director of a pending nonprofit for County Restorative Justice Program for first-time juvenile offenders. I was volunteering then, which I've done several times, and oftentimes. There was no permanent job offered to me, and that's one reason why I ended up homeless. Once I ended up homeless, people assumed I was nothing. They never saw me again as a person. I became no more than a pathology. The me that you see today was not the me then, so therefore people could pathologize who I was and who I am. My trials became my testimony. My testimony has fueled my advocacy, and my advocacy is why I'm at this platform before you today. My journey of rewriting my story is personal. It's not just about me. It's about my mama, who just turned 81. It's about my twin sister, will be 57 this coming Sunday. It's about my grandmother, who's no longer here, but the intergenerational trauma of impoverished networks, of why a Skid Row could exist and how we could be pathologized, and why so many big black folks are living in such dire conditions, even though we have been contributors within our communities and across this country. Skid Row screams as to what is going on across the country. So I'll just end with saying that now 4 years housed, I am just finding my way back. My trials continue. My trauma, you don't see my trauma with my lipstick on, because my scars are internal. And this is what we need to understand about what trauma looks like, and to be trauma-informed and understand from a lens of trauma-informed. This is what our community has to become equipped and educated about and socialized as far as what it means to be trauma-informed. This is what the system is lacking, and why the system continues to perpetuate the inequities of why people continue to be displaced, living in poverty, and not able to, quote unquote, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Imagine if we could shift the paradigm here in Skid Row, here in Los Angeles. Imagine how we could shift the problems of California. Just imagine. That is why we need California Rescue Plan, investing $20 billion into housing over the next 5 years. Will provide dignity to thousands of Californians who are disproportionately black, and particularly black women. Black women, single adult women have become a subpopulation of homelessness. Please understand, black middle-aged elderly women track as one of the #1 demographics. And this is not just year after year, but it's literally decade after decade by huge disproportionate numbers. We have been so long dehumanized and ignored, and now it's time to change that. Now time to change that lens. Nowhere is this more in need than here in Skid Row. Skid Row would not exist if we were not black. I am sure of that, not all of these years. And I just want to say that I want to thank the Assemblyman. And I'd like to thank Councilman de León. I'd also like to thank Amy Turk of Downtown Women's Center, where I spent almost every single day the first 2 to 3 years when I first came here to Skid Row. It was my lifeline. It is a safe zone for women here in Skid Row, and we need to respect the fact that it is a safe zone for women here in Skid Row. I'd like to thank Pete White, who I've also been part of the advocacy through his grassroots work here in Skid Row. And we all have to work together, and we all need to ensure that women are at the front forward of women's needs here in Skid Row. I thank you for your time today. We can no longer talk about equality and empowerment while continuing to enforce inequities. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Apologies.
Thank you so very much, Suzette, for being so deeply personal and being so very powerful. You may originally be from Arizona, but you are now an Angelino, and we have taken you into our family, so thank you so very much. I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize also to all of the women and the men who've taken time out of their incredibly busy schedules from Housing is a Human Right. That's right behind us here today. Housing is a human right. Gracias por venir hoy día. Muchas gracias. Last but not least, we have a woman who's going to close us out for us here today. You may have seen her, you may have heard of her. She has a little something going on right now with the city of Los Angeles as well as the county. She represents the LA Alliance, a lawsuit against the city and county of LA, but we're not here to speak about that. You know, we're here because when I said a few moments earlier, we have folks from our business community. We have elected officials from the Valley and from the East Side and elsewhere. We have advocates who've dedicated their lives in the trenches every single day. We have men and women who are currently homeless, have been homeless, or on the cusp of being homeless. And we have litigators too. So we're all coming together because we know ultimately at the end of the day, whatever the outcome is on any type of litigation, whether it's the current one, whether it's future litigation, ultimately at the end of the day, we still have a homeless crisis. And the only way to deal with it is making the right resources smartly, intelligently, with accountability, so we provide those roofs over our community's heads. Last but not least, let's bring up from LA Alliance, that is Elizabeth Mitchell. Elizabeth Mitchell.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate it. I appreciate the invite. It's no secret we're in a fight with the city. We're in a fight with the county right now. That's not a joke. But when you look around and you look at who we have here, this is a sort of microcosm of what we're looking for in the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. People coming together from all different backgrounds, representing different ideologies, different histories, different perceptions, all coming together to say, this needs to change. The stories we've heard today have made it clear we are steeped in a tale of human tragedy. We see it every day and we drive on. We pretend not to notice because it's too painful and too hard to confront. Without a comprehensive strategy, our local government is constantly fighting skirmishes and losing the war. Housing solutions have been too few, too expensive, they take too long, and they leave too many people out on the streets in the cold or heat here in Los Angeles. The goal of LA Alliance, which represents both housed and unhoused, businesses, communities, residents, everyone here that you see here today, the goal of the Alliance has always been to compel systemic change and drive a comprehensive strategy that includes more housing built quickly and cost effectively. Conversations that the Alliance has had with state leaders have consistently been, we want to help you, send us a proposal. Well, thank you for that proposal. Thank you for that proposal. We have that proposal now. It's time for the state to step up, not with budget dust, but with real money. It's time to move forward. This proposal will take advantage of what we currently see of the state surplus and get ahead of this crisis.
Yeah, yes. Put our money where our mouth is.
That's right. That's right. We need roofs available in months, not years, at a fraction of the cost we're currently seeing. And that is an integral part of that comprehensive strategy we have been advocating for. The key to this proposal is accountability, so we do not repeat the same mistakes and allow waste and fraud to run rampant. Flexibility is necessary for municipalities to respond in ways that are best for their own communities, but also don't require lengthy bureaucratic hoops to jump through that just delay the solutions. Beyond all of that, what we need is the political will to make that happen, with laser focus to make that happen. And looking around, look at who we have gathered on Monday at 8 a.m. to champion this proposal, right? The people here, all of us, all of these people here, this is who will solve homelessness, not make homelessness less bad, but solve it, get to a functional zero. We can do it in California, we can do it in LA. This is one step in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, thank you so very much. Also, too, for your very powerful words. I think what has been said has been said. I know that folks have to get going. We can have individual interviews. Folks want those individual interviews, or if folks want any Q&A, we can do Q&A, or we can go to individual interviews, because we have here, again, Councilwoman Monica Rodriguez. We have here Assemblyman Miguel Santiago. We have Pete White, Lee Burgas, Amy Turk, Susie Shannon, DeAndre Valencia, Suzette Shaw, Elizabeth Mitchell, as well as our friends from Housing is a Human Right as well, too. So for those who want, we'll do one quick question. Let's do one quick question.
Remember, if I want to take this, the $20 billion, so last week there were 13 mayors saying, oh, we like this idea. They don't want a piece of it. So to give me ideas on how it should be split up, and how should get all 20.
Listen, the vast majority, the $20 billion is for statewide. The vast majority of that money will clearly come to LA County, to the city of Los Angeles, because as I said a few moments ago, we are ground zero. We are the epicenter for homelessness nationwide. So on a per capita basis, clearly the vast majority will come to the city and county of Los Angeles. That being said, also too, we want to underscore a theme, which is about accountability and getting the most bang for your buck, providing value, because ultimately at the end of the day, those surplus dollars, even though because there's a progressive tax system that we have, we don't get tax revenues here on PIT, personal income tax, on capital gains. That is taxpayer dollars, and we want to make sure we put the roof over our constituents' heads, not just in LA, but throughout the state of California. It is budget may revise. That means the governor will submit his revision of the budget that was originally submitted back in January, and that's what we're going to do. Between now and then, we're going to fight to make sure we get those dollars. I know the big mayors. I've been in touch with Mayor Sam Liccardo, who called me, who's the chair right now of the big mayors from San Jose. Our former pro tem, my predecessor, Darrell Steinberg, also too has contacted me as well. They were $16 billion. When they found out Miguel and I were going to go $20 billion, there was a may revise themselves too. They went from 16 to $20 billion right there. But we also, for your, I know my staff here will submit the letter to all of you. Now, Miguel wants to say a few words here quickly, but we have Senate President Pro Tem Emeritus Kevin de León, President Pro Tem Emeritus, Mayor of Sacramento, Darrell Steinberg, the President Pro Tem Emeritus, John Burton from San Francisco, Karen Bass, our Congresswoman, former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, and former Speaker of the Assembly, as well as the former Speaker and President of the City Council, Herb Wesson. I believe Antonio Villaraigosa, former mayor, as well as Speaker, has called to ask to sign up on the letter too. Those are the former leaders, respectively, speakers and President Pro Tems of the bicameral legislative body, who have said we need to get on this together now, not tomorrow. Miguel Santiago.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple of things to look for. A few things to look for. I shouldn't say a couple. Number one is how those dollars are split between the county and the city. And every year we go into the negotiations. So it's usually like a 40-60 split. But there's also, for those cities who are not included, the continuum of care. So usually you'll see a split between cities, counties, continuum of care. And then there's the regional fights or discussions, which is what percentage goes to what cities per what number. Last year, if I'm not mistaken, the Los Angeles area got about 45%. If we were doing per capita, it should have been about 51%. But where we started from at 40% in the budget negotiations and ended up at 45% per capita for the region, still left us shy about 5%. But that's the way, the things that we look for, and that's the alarm that we're raising now, because as we go through the budget negotiations, number one, we want the dollars to stay there. And then number two, we'll go into the deep dive with our colleagues in the region to try to ensure that there is a per capita number that better matches the needs of the area that we represent. So that's things to look for: county, cities, continuum of care, and then regional percentages, the way it's broken up.
Thank you. Thank you, KNX, for always doing your due diligence. Any other questions? Seeing none right now. I've spoken with the governor. I won't get into details of a confidential conversation that we've had. We've spoken with the governor's executive staff as well. They're well aware of the proposal idea. I feel very confident that the governor will be stepping up, no doubt about it. The question is landing that plane on the number that we believe is needed to deal with the issue of homelessness housing for our community members.
A question in terms of how the money is going to be spent. You know, specifically, there have been gripes about the way money's been spent in the past, coming from HHH
Sure.
and H. Certainly, within Judge Carter's opinion, they want an audit of that money. How do we know this money is going to be spent in a way that will make an immediate impact in the right way?
Listen, that's a very good question, because I think that's been the butt of a lot of controversy with regards to taxpayer dollars and how those dollars are being utilized. Are they being effectively utilized? Are they accountable and transparent to the voters? Ultimately, when the voters themselves, either through a general obligation bond, whether it's a budget act, when they themselves are persuaded by politicians, by elected officials to make the investment through their pocketbook, they expect results, and they want to see real tangible progress. They don't want to see more folks living on our streets or in alleyways. So the point is, we're asking at a macro level for $20 billion over a course of 5 years. Be rest assured, in the short time of my tenure on the city council, and folks have heard of my criticism of the way HHH has been rolled out, regardless of the narratives of HHH, I've been very clear. It is unsustainable, the dollar amounts per investment right now. We need to get the value for our buck. So Miguel Santiago and I, as well as others, will be working very closely with the governor, as well as my successor, Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins, the leader of the State Assembly, that being Speaker Rendon, where Miguel Santiago will be engaging with him directly to put forward that language to provide strict accountability, transparency. We need to control what the outcomes are, not the developers, period. We need to control what the outcomes are, because we're not dealing with a small number. We're dealing with a massive, gargantuan number of individuals. This is unlike anything we've ever experienced before. This is of biblical proportions. So right now, it is about getting the most bang for the buck, dealing with the crisis at hand. We don't have the luxury of doing Ritz-Carlton prices right now. And that's what we've been doing historically. I know there's some diversity of opinion on this issue, even among ourselves who are present here today. But those who are in charge or the purse strings are the ones who will be dictating the outcomes as well. Miguel, if you want to say anything?
Look, and I won't repeat what's been said, but one thing to take a look at too is this proposal is not alone. There are other things that we're working on. Like I'm working on a bill that seeks to make local municipalities continue Project Room Key, so that there's some continuance. We're also, Mr. Chu and I are also working on legislation to do accountability, aiming at the number 0 by the end of the decade, which would require municipalities to present plans, which would require reporting. So there's a number of things that we're working on the accountability. But the crux of it will have to be done as we're laying out our budget arguments to put everything on the table. Look, there is a diversity of opinions up here, right? Let me be very clear. But I think when you're tackling the issue, one thing that I think we would all agree on is you can't keep doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result, because that's just a simple definition of insanity. And when you have to put things on the table, we got to look at creative solutions like you've seen. Look, they all aim at putting somebody in permanent supportive housing or in permanent housing. And you could put different solutions on the table, like safe places to park cars, with porta potties, with showers, like we've seen. You could put places where communities can live if they're not in a shelter, in a place where they can live temporarily, but they're safe. And we've seen that up and down the state. Safe houses. You could use temporary hotel rooms. We could use permanent supportive housing. We could talk about modular. We could talk about adaptive reuse or tiny homes. But we're at a place in time where you got to put everything on the table. Everything on the table. And that's what's great about everybody who's working up here, right? Permanent supportive housing, to solve this problem. Because we have to have that sense of emergency, that sense of emergency, ironclad accountability, and that radical change in the way we do solving homelessness.
Let me add one thing too, because Miguel said something that was very important. Miguel said whether it's adaptive reuse, whether it's prefabricated modular housing done on city, county, state properties where you eliminate land costs altogether, whether it's the issue of non-congregate tiny homes, which is just a short-term reprieve. It's not a long-term permanent solution, but it gets folks off the street. I want, the point, Miguel, is you're putting all the options and solutions on the table. You're not dedicating exclusive resources by law. For example, as the author and architect of Senate Bill 100, making California the largest state in the nation, the largest economy in the world, to legally dedicate itself to 100% clean renewable energy, I didn't write in the law that it has to be precisely 75% wind and 25% solar, or 25% solar, 75% wind. I said there's a minimum baseline for renewable energy, and the rest can be zero carbon. The point is to incentivize capital on the sidelines to create and innovate the technologies to accelerate our pathway to get to 100%. The same thing here. With Assemblymember Miguel Santiago had a measure, and somehow, some way, prefabricated modular housing got wiped out because the housing organizations right now are heartily focused on their bottom line, not the bottom line that we have right now or our constituents. That's our bottom line right now. Those who are living on the streets and the tents. That's our bottom line right now. Not any other individual organization or entities or associations who are focused on taxpayer dollar profits for their own profits right there. Enough of my commentary right there. Thank you very much, everybody.